Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Housing Issues in the Ohio Legislature session. I'm sure you had a great day so far and are very much so looking forward to this session. I am Ayana Wool-Donald, Vice President and Ohio Market Leader for Enterprise Community Partners. As part of today's session, we have a lot of distinguished and esteemed guests, so we're really looking forward to the conversation before us today. Also, keep in mind as I facilitate this conversation, please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. And so we aim that this session will be conversational in nature. And so I will advance and pose questions out of the chat box as appropriate during the conversation. First, I'd like to get started as we move through, I'll introduce each speaker. And our first speaker of today is Senator Reynolds. She's the chair of the Ohio Senate Select Committee on Housing, and we're very much so looking forward to hearing what she has to say today. So she'll start with some opening remarks on issues in the Ohio legislature. Thank you, Senator Reynolds, for being with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Certainly happy to be a part of this conversation. As we know, housing is a huge issue, not only here in Ohio, but nationwide, that we are experiencing a housing shortage. And we've had a crisis for some time. And the problem with housing, the problem is, how do we solve this housing crisis? And so at the Ohio Senate, we are taking leadership and started a Senate Select Committee on Housing, for which I am privileged to be the chair as a freshman senator, but I'm very familiar with this issue because it is an issue that in my professional business, I have been a provider of housing for the last 18 years, housing some of the hardest to house individuals in the state of Ohio. And by that, I'm talking about people coming out of prison. And so this is an area that I'm very passionate about. I'm also a real estate agent, have been for the last 20 years. And so I've been working in this housing space for quite some time. And I've housed professionally over 5,000 people throughout the state of Ohio, and created jobs with some of those hardest to house people. But in the Senate, we've taken up the charge this year to really take a deep dive on housing and what we can do as a state legislature to really help us to move the needle, if you will, and to try to reimagine what housing should look like in Ohio. Fortunately, the answer is simple, but yet profound. It's simple in that it's all regarding a lack of supply in the face of rising demand. It's a supply and demand issue. And as employers are hiring more people and populations grow, demand for housing grows with it. So if housing is scarce, then we know that the price begins to rise, and that means that people with less money can't compete and they get priced out of the market. And so a lot of times we're saying, oh, we need affordable housing, when all actuality, we don't necessarily need affordable housing. We need not affordable subsidized housing, if you will. We need more housing so that it's affordable. We don't have enough housing in Ohio, and with the economic boom that we're experiencing here in Ohio, especially with large corporations like Intel coming in, that is even exacerbating the problem. And so we need to have a statewide initiative on how we accomplish this. And so one of the things that we're doing through the Senate Select Committee on Housing is going across the state and hearing testimony in different parts of the state about what are some of the housing challenges, what are potential solutions, how can we work alongside our local municipalities, our counties, how can we work together to tackle this problem. And there's a lot of really, really good creative solutions. I literally just an hour ago was touring a manufactured housing location in Columbus, Ohio, that's doing manufactured housing, and they're able to cut the cost of housing significantly, almost by a third, and build in less time. So we need to look at how can we take the bureaucracy out of this process, but also how we can incentivize more housing so that it can be affordable. So I'm just happy to be a part of this conversation. I'm happy to be able to lead this charge and to work with my colleagues on the call today to see what we can do in Ohio. Just to let you know, through the legislature, once we tour, we're going to do tours all the way till about February. We're going to come up with a report that issues our findings and recommendations, and then we're going to take legislative action because we really want to make sure that we make some really good advances here in Ohio, like some other states have done. And so stay tuned. We have some exciting things coming up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for kicking us off. Appreciate that. Next, we're going to have remarks from Sean Smith. I'm sure everyone is yearning to hear from the Executive Director of OFA. Right, Sean? That's what happens when you walk into a room. Everybody has tons of questions about tax
complaints
and such. So, Sean, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Pleasure to be with you all today. Very happy to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about, who OFA is for those who aren't necessarily aware. What we're seeing in the housing market, and then move into some items that came out of the budget that are very, very exciting. So if you're not familiar with OFA, we're the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. Our sole purpose as a state agency is focused on facilitating the production of affordable housing across the state of Ohio. We basically have two sides to that. One is multifamily housing, focusing on issuing out the LIHTC credits, gap financing, and associated loan products for low and moderate income and renters across the state. And then the other is focused on home ownership. Most of that is focused on getting individuals into home ownership who have not owned homes before. We have some great interest rates that are very competitive, if not generally always beat the banks that are out there. We also have down payment assistance of 2.5% and 5% of the purchase price of the home that help folks, bring that the current housing prices into more of an affordable range. So the work we do contributes $4.5 billion a year to the state economy. We generate $423 million in tax revenue and create or sustain more than 27,000 jobs. In fiscal year 2023, we funded the creation or preservation of 3,800, almost 3,900 affordable rental units across the state. Of the units created, 481 of those are for households with income at or below 30% of the area median income, and almost 1,500 of those are in projects that are accessible to individuals with physical disabilities. On the homeowner side, in fiscal year 2023, OFA financed almost 2,800 loans with assistance to 376 of those mortgages with 2.5% down payment, and almost 2,400 using 5% down payment. The median age of our renters is 31. Head of household income median age is 55. The renter median annual household income is only $13,000. And so we really take pride in everything we accomplish. We value our partnerships across the state in achieving those outcomes. Some of the data statistics we've seen over the last couple of years with regard to home ownership in Ohio, the rate of home ownership has started to decline. That rate reached a high in 2020 of 70%, and then by the end of 2022, that rate had fallen to 64%. That's lower than the national average for the first time on record. Home sales have steadily declined since the start of the pandemic. In 2022, there were 209,000 homes purchased in Ohio. That's the lowest annual number since 2015. In 2022, the median home price in Ohio was $174,000. That was higher than any year on record, and we know it's much higher than that now. The median home price in 2021 was 2.6 times the median household income. That's the largest price to income ratio since 2005, making home ownership more unaffordable to many prospective buyers, which we're all very well aware of as well. On the rental side, vacancy rates have been steadily falling since 2009. In 2021, both homeowner and rental vacancy rates hit their lowest record levels, 0.4% and 4% respectively. And at the end of 2022, those rates remained relatively low, indicating, as we're all aware, an extremely tight housing market. From 2016 to 2021, there was a 38% decline in the number of vacant units available for sale or rent. In that same time period, there was a 13% increase in the number of units for seasonal, recreation, or occasional use, including short-term rental properties, some of which we heard in the last session. Adjusted for inflation, median gross rent in Ohio increased by 10% from 788 per month in 2012 to 870 per month in 2021. And again, as we're all aware, rent is higher than any year on record, other than 2021 when adjusted for inflation. So those are some of the highlights of just what's going on in the state. One more highlight, I guess. There's been a net loss of affordable rental housing for the lowest income Ohioans. There are 447,000 extremely low income renters in Ohio, but only 177,000 rental homes are available for them, leaving a shortage of 270,000 rental units. The affordability gap between supply and demand for the lowest income renters is now widening, with a net loss of more than 15,000 affordable units between 2020 and 2021. So, entering into kind of the budget, biennial budget process, the governor, we sat down and tried to figure out what solutions we could bring to the table. So the governor, when he presented his executive budget to the legislature, included a suite of housing initiatives. And a number of those did come through the legislative process. Two that we have at OFA are focused on tax credits, which is just a lot of what we do. One for the multifamily side, one for the single family side. The multifamily side, I think we're the 23rd or 24th state in the country to have a state tax credit now dedicated for multifamily low income and moderate income individuals. It was $100 million per year for 4 years. We just finalized the allocation plan, the basically grant requirements for those funds this last month. And we're working here in December to open up the application portal to get projects moving through. In essence, we're going to pair the $100 million each, this first year with 4% LIHTC credits. When we were receiving comments from the industry, we heard do it fast, do it simple, keep the requirements very streamlined. And so we listened to that and paired it with the 4% tax credits. The statute that was produced through the legislative process did require those state tax credits to be paired with a LIHTC award. So that was the quickest way for us to get those out the door. Now, next year, we'll have more time. Next fiscal year, starting July 1st, we will have more time to work with these funds, that second tranche of $100 million. So could evolve. We could either bring in BGF with that, the bomb gap financing funds. We could bring in 9% with that. But at least for this first round, we wanted to get those funds out the door. The last thing we want to do is leave anything on the table. We want to make sure we're utilizing those tax credits to their fullest extent. Then on the single family side, we have a new tax credit. This is very innovative. We're not aware of anyone else in the country who's undertaken this at this point in time. But in essence, the legislature provided $50 million each year for 4 years for the purpose of constructing or rehabilitating single-family homes for home ownership. The thought here is that we would have a government entity, and the government entity is defined in statute. It's municipalities, land banks, port authorities, CDCs, those kind of things, can come in with an application and a project team made of things like, a developer, a builder, syndicator, those types of things, to construct or rehab those single family homes. The statute says that the awarding of those tax credits are competitive. So we have an allocation plan draft out now. It's the second draft. We just got that out yesterday, and it's on our website. So if you want to take a look at that, the first round of comments we got focused a lot on how the tax credits are claimed. So the statute says that the amount of tax credits we can award are the difference between the construction cost and the appraised value of the property. So if it costs $100,000 to construct, but it's worth $200,000 or $120,000, then when it's complete, that $20,000 delta is what we can fund with the tax credits. And that may flip too. You could have the cost of construction higher than the appraised value as well, and just that delta is what we will fund with the tax credits. But the applications for those, that program will probably come out here March, April timeframe. Again, it's brand new, doesn't exist anywhere in the country. Multifamily was a little bit easier lift because at the end of the day, it's gap financing for these projects. but for single family, it's an entirely new realm that doesn't exist anywhere. So we had to get it staffed up, and a lot more uh, diligence went into the drafting of the document, and obviously we're getting a lot more comments back. Trying to make sure that we're moving forward in the right way. Those are two projects that did come out as part of the budgetary process, and we're excited to see what we can produce with them. Yeah.
Thanks, Sean, for the comments and updates. I'm sure there probably are some questions that are hanging out
Sure there
there.
are.
But before we move on to those questions, next up is Sean Carvin, Executive Director of Ohio Land Bank Association. And Sean, really looking forward to hearing, maybe sharing some thoughts about Welcome Home Ohio and other things that you see brewing in the legislature.
Definitely. Thank you all. I won't get too deep into what land banks are, since I imagine most of you were on earlier and heard our presentation. But during that presentation, I kind of mentioned Welcome Home Ohio, but didn't get too deep into the legislation. I said I wouldn't have slides, but I'm going to pull these up real quick. So as of right now, the guidelines, this program was in the biennial budget, and ODOD is overseeing the implementation of the program. They are working on guidelines currently that we're expecting to see at some point this month. The bill that created this program was very prescriptive in some areas and then not so much in others. So there very well may be a lot of questions that are unanswered at this time. And once these guidelines release, we'll have a little more understanding of how the program is going to be rolled out. But I will go through what we do know at this point. The legislation is kind of split into three portions. So there's $50 million in grants for land banks as the only eligible applicant for the acquisition of properties. As of, well, at least the bill did not identify any specific cap on the acquisition portion of the grant. Obviously, they'll work that out in the guidelines, but the bill didn't state that, it's capped at 30, 60, 90, whatever it may be. So that would be to acquire properties, turn them into homeownership opportunities. The other $50 million is a grant for land banks to put towards the renovation or new build of a qualifying residential structure. So those are the two grant portions. And then there's a tax credit portion, which is the other $50 million, a wider pool of people who are allowed to apply for that. And that will be, I don't know if they're going to have all these guidelines ready at the same time, or if they're planning on rolling the grant out, followed by the tax credit, but we will know very quickly here. So the grant portion, I'll focus on the grant portion first. They are specifically for residential properties up to 10 units. They have to be sold to an owner occupant who is committed to living in the property for 5 years. There's going to be some hardship discretion if they have to get out of the house before the 5 years, but if they just sold the house, there is a penalty that goes towards the buyer. 80% AMI or below. There's a 20-year affordability period on the property. Properties can only be sold for $180,000 at that first sale. Subsequent sales can go higher, but again, it has to remain 80% AMI or below. And the property has to be a minimum of 1,000 square feet, the living space. So there's land banks that are looking at straight single family houses. I know a couple land banks that are looking at potentially doing condo style or townhouse builds that they would be able to sell to homeowners if their zoning allows for it. And the last thing that the bill requires is that the occupants go through a 1-year financial literacy course. And then on the tax credit side, this is the one that has the higher cap. So there's no cap on the acquisition as of right now. The renovation new build portion is $30,000, and then the tax credit is another 50 million, and that'll be a $90,000 tax credit, or 1/3 of the total project cost. It's a non-refundable tax credit, and it can be carried forward over a 5-year period. And all of these have to be issued by 2025. So easy task there, right? And so that's what we know about the program as the bill was written. We have been meeting regularly with ODOD, with a number of stakeholders, not just land banks, to talk through some of this, because obviously land banks can't do all of this by themselves. We are going to be looking to work with our partner organizations. So the land bank has to be the lead applicant, but there is a list of eligible developers, which of course I didn't put in here, but it's very similar to what Mr. Smith, I'm going to call him that since we're both Sean, Mr. Smith said about his program with the entities, the port authorities, the land banks, all of that. They're eligible developers. So the land bank can act as a pass-through to get this money to CDCs or habitats, all of these other organizations, to make sure that the money is spent down and well utilized. So like I said, this is what we know as of now. There is going to be guidelines released in the very near future. So we are going to have some more information to see how this will really roll out. It's not perfect. But again, this is a program that they haven't really done before. There hasn't been a lot of investment in affordable home ownership. So I think everyone expected some kinks that are going to need to be worked out. But the money is there, so we can kind of work through all of that with ODOD and the legislature as needed, to get this to a state where we can work with it and get that money spent down in a timely manner.
All right, thanks, Sean. Since Sean, you kind of elevated the presentation by having slides. Do you mind sharing the slides with everyone on the call, or maybe perhaps if you can drop a link in the chat?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, thank you so much.
All
right, next up, Tori. We have Tori Hollingsworth, who's the Executive Director of Ohio CDC Association. And as being a policy and an advocate, I'm interested to hear what your take of what are the interesting things that are before our legislator.
Yeah, thanks, Ayana, and I'm glad to be here with you all today. Like Ayana said, I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio CDC Association. We are a statewide membership organization of nonprofit community developers and aligned organizations. So we've got folks in all 88 counties working around the state, many of whom are working on housing issues and developer rehab housing, both subsidized and market rate. So we have been watching several of the programs that have already been discussed really closely. We think our members will be able to utilize particularly the Welcome Home Ohio and the single family tax credit program to start to get some new units out on the market, and are excited with the ways that both of those are developing, as the agencies that have the big task of getting them done have been moving that forward. So we're grateful for the opportunity to continue to comment and work with them. I actually want to bring up a program that has not been mentioned so far that I think could be interesting to folks that came out of the budget as well. There was a program that was actually put into the state treasurer's office that allows for folks to save toward down payments for first-time home buyer or first-time home purchases. that will allow them to basically be able to accelerate their savings by putting their down payment savings into tax advantaged high interest rate accounts. So basically they're able to use all of the dollars that the state has invested to get these better interest rates that then help future home buyers to save more quickly towards a down payment. So the state treasurer and the governor's office announced some really preliminary guidelines for that program this week. They expect the program to go live in January. The program is going to be called the Home Buyer Plus Savings Program. So if folks want to follow that, the treasurer's office doesn't actually have anything quite up yet, but they do have a press release so you can learn just a little bit more. But the basics are folks will be able to save up to $100,000 in these accounts. They'll work with a financial institution that has partnered with the treasurer's office to actually open these accounts. So the account will be with a local bank, so an institution that hopefully folks are already familiar with. And they'll be able to take a state income tax deduction on the savings that they put into those accounts too. So should be a good opportunity for folks who are working towards homeownership to be able to save a little more quickly as they move in that direction. The one other thing that I wanted to mention, because I know that several folks we're mostly talking about state policy, but a place where there's an interesting intersection between state and local policy is on zoning. I know a number of cities around the state have been looking at their zoning codes over the last several years. Several places have made some pretty big moves around moving away from a focus on single family zoning or creating some carve outs to allow for more density. So things like accessory dwelling units and other ways of providing for basically creating more units in our existing footprint. And there was some discussion in the budget about state support for zoning code updates. We think that could be really helpful because it is not inexpensive and it is pretty challenging to take on these tasks. And particularly for smaller governments that just may not have the internal capacity and may need to bring on a consultant, there's a lot of value in the state bringing some of that support, particularly as the Senate Select Committee on Housing has been taking a really hard look at the impact of zoning on housing affordability and housing availability in the state. We think that could be helpful and to provide local governments with that support as they're trying to create more access and more ease to build housing locally.
Thanks, Tori. Next, Jason, where are you? Jason Warner, Director of Strategic Engagement from Greater Ohio Policy Center, is here to share some thoughts and words as well.
Yes, Ayanna, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be here. Yes, Jason Warner, I am the Director of Strategic Engagement at Greater Ohio Policy Center. If you're not familiar with us, we are a statewide nonprofit organization. We're based here in Columbus, but we do operate statewide with a focus on sustainable growth and promoting smart growth policy statewide. Housing is one of those issues that we have been working on over the last few years. Everyone has done a great job of talking about a lot of the different programs that have passed either in the budget or some of the other programs. Two that I want to highlight that I don't think we've talked about yet that were passed as part of the budget. These were actually renewals of programs that were enacted 2 years ago. The first is the statewide commercial and residential demolition program. That's providing $150 million this year for the demolition of vacant and blighted commercial and residential structures to Ohio's land banks. They've been doing a great job with that. They opened up the application portal for grants for that program back at the end of October. And much as last year, we're anticipating that all $150 million of that money will be spoken for and accounted for, put to good work in communities across the state and trying to get rid of some of these vacant and blighted properties and make those available for future redevelopment opportunities. The other is the Brownfield Remediation Program. This was also created in the budget 2 years ago. It was refunded once again in the state budget this year. Previously, the program was a single $350 million allocation. The program now is going to be funded in 2 tranches of $175 million per year. Another big change with that program this year is that previously, any entity was able to go to the Ohio Department of Development, who's administering the program, and request funds for the program. Under changes that were made in the state budget this year, you do now have to work through a designated lead applicant. All 88 counties have their own designated lead applicant. It varies from county to county, and the more large urban counties that have land banks, they were designated as lead applicants for that program. Any of the other counties around the state, if you're curious to find out who your lead applicant is, the Ohio Department of Development has a list that's available on their website. We also have that on our website, ohiobrownfields.com, that you can go and look for that information about. But they will be opening the application portal for the Brownfields program actually this upcoming Tuesday, December 5th, is when they will be opening applications for that first tranche of $175 million. And those applications will be accepted through April 1st or until funds are no longer available. And we are anticipating that much like the first year of the program, starting back in 2021, that all $175 million will likely quickly be taken up by communities across the state. It is important also to note that with that program, in the first year, there's a $1 million set aside that is being available for each county in the state. So every county will have the opportunity to get access to $1 million in brownfield remediation and redevelopment grants. And then in the second year of the program, all $175 million will be available for competitive grants. So that will be coming available beginning in fiscal year 2025. Some other issues that Greater Ohio has been working on right now. We're keeping a close eye on the Senate Select Committee. We did testify with the committee back in September. And we're also interested in, and I know that on your last session, Senator Bill Blessing was there. And we're working very closely with Senator Blessing on the legislation that he's carrying, Senate Bill 76, which is looking to take on the issue of institutional real estate investment. This is a problem that Greater Ohio has been tracking for a while, is becoming a bigger and bigger issue in communities large and small throughout the state of Ohio, as these institutional investors are entering the marketplace, purchasing single-family homes and taking them away from being owner-occupied structures into renter-occupied structures. Just last week, I saw some statistics over the past 3 months. It suggested that 3 of the top 10 metropolitan areas in the country that saw increases in institutional real estate investors acquiring residential properties, the 3 of the larger metro areas in the country were in Ohio. Columbus was number 1, Cleveland, I believe, was number 2, and Cincinnati was within the top 10. So that's something that we're keeping a very close eye on, and we're very much looking forward to continuing to work with Senator Blessing on the legislation that I know that he's introduced. I think that there's likely going to be some changes. He's probably indicated that in his remarks earlier today that are probably going to be made to that legislation. But we're eagerly looking forward to continuing to have that dialogue and working with the legislature so that we can try to take on that issue. The last thing I'll mention, I know it's going to be getting started, I believe, in the new year. The legislature in the budget did create a property tax working group. If you've been paying any attention at all over the last few months, there has been quite a bit of discussion about property tax evaluations that have been going on around the state, and a lot of sudden increases in property evaluations and the subsequent taxes that are going to be affected by that. So while there were attempts in the state budget to try to sneak in some proposals that would address that, the legislature ultimately decided not to try to rush anything through. And instead, they created this working group that's going to be appointed with members from both the House and the Senate who's going to be taking a look at the issue and making recommendations to the leadership of the House and the Senate, as well as the governor, about approaches that the state should be taking to help to address this issue. So that's something else that we're going to be keeping an eye on in the new year, and hopefully we'll be getting some good information out of that group, and will lead to some potential legislation that we'll be able to address either late next year or potentially into the next General Assembly. So thank you.
Thank you. And rounding out our panelists is Gina Wilt, who's the Advocacy Director at COHIO, Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. I think everybody knows COHIO. Gina, welcome. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Iona, and thank you for the opportunity to present. I can maybe do a little summary too, I guess. I guess I'll start off with COHIO. So COHIO is a coalition of organizations and individuals committed to ending homelessness and promoting safe, decent, accessible, and fair housing for all people. And our focus does remain on helping our lowest income neighbors and friends. We're advocating for those who are living in affordable housing, for those who need affordable housing, and people experiencing homelessness. So I'm really excited to be here presenting along with such an impressive group of statewide advocates, including Senator Reynolds, who right now is our ultimate advocate. So we support her as she keeps pressing forward and appreciate her genuine spirit of wanting to find solutions, and really excited to be included in this group. And Director Smith, thank you for all your comments. You touched on some of this, but I'll just do a little reminder. So our average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment has increased by 24% in the last 2 years. Renters now need to earn about $19.09 an hour to live in a 2-bedroom home, basic 2-bedroom. Only 3 of the 10 most common jobs in Ohio actually pay that $19.09 an hour, which has created the gap. And as the gap report also tells us, nearly 708,000 Ohio renters are spending over half their income on rent. And we really don't want you spending more than 30% of your income on rent or housing costs. And at the conference yesterday, the Ohio Housing Conference, was that yesterday? Or, I think it was yesterday. There was a
blur.
It's a blur. There was a great session on housing for all, and we heard from individuals with disabilities. And one of the panelists was talking about she's spending 80% of her income on rent. So we know that this is not sustainable, and it should be no surprise that evictions are rising. So Ohio landlords file around 105,000 eviction cases each year. The brunt of this crisis is on our lowest income renters, and they really have nowhere to go. So the inventory for them in the rental market is shot. They're working the high demand, low pay jobs, add in childcare, transportation, a healthcare issue, and unfortunately, eviction is inevitable. So I really believe we have to directly and aggressively address the eviction crisis in order to make progress in this housing space. Butler and Clark County evictions are up 25%. Montgomery County saw evictions up by 41%. Warren County, 27%. We know that policies that prevent evictions will have a positive trickle-up impact. So in my world, I think hope, grace, redemption, and I really don't think if we can't give people hope and they can't see a path forward towards that economic prosperity, it's going to be really difficult to work with. So, and a lot of the people we're talking about, it's mostly women in Ohio, women with children who are being challenged right now with evictions. They need to see that fresh start as possible. So we are working on eviction ceilings and expungement policies. We had a bill last General Assembly with Senator Craig and Senator Coonsey, a bipartisan bill. It did not make it through. So we are looking forward to reworking that language and hoping to see something introduced again here soon. Some other tenant protection work that we would support include Tavia Golonsky's bill in the House. It's a right to counsel, or we'll say access to counsel, helping people who just don't know what to do when that notice hits their door, that they have access to legal support. And it can make such a big difference if we can prevent evictions. that's the way we want to go. So the eviction prevention space, the tenant protection space, we would definitely like to see more policies in that area. But the one I'll focus on right now, because I'm like looking at the clock and looking at Iona, so I'll focus on the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. So Ohio is definitely continues the dedication to making sure the Ohio Housing Trust Fund is bolstered, and that its support for this fund continues. It is still the state's primary source for funding for homelessness, for home repair and development. So last year, the trust fund supported homeless services for over 33,000 Ohioans, funded the repair of close to 2,500 homes, and helped finance the construction and rehab of close to 800 units of affordable rental housing. So hopefully your agencies are able to access these dollars for your communities through Ohio Department of Development, also with OFA. So House Bill 181 is currently moving through the House Finance Committee. It seeks to modernize county recording offices that collect these dollars, that the money be equally divided between the counties and the trust fund. And that's how it's been since 2003. And so we appreciate the sponsors in the House, that's Brett Hillier and Rep. Williams, who recognize that this precedent should be maintained. So we're supportive of House Bill 181, which would, as they digitize records and they modernize that system, that they maintain the Ohio Housing Trust Fund in any fee increase and any change that they have, so that our fee mirrors the county recorder fee. Unfortunately, right now we have Senate Bill 94. So Senate Bill 94 is not the bill that we want. It is similar to 181. It is Brenner's bill. It is moving through the Senate. There's a hearing next week for opponent and interested party testimony. So if anyone wants to come to the State House, we do not support that because it does not include the trust fund in the increase of any fees that they change to digitize records or modernize the county recorder's office. So we would ask Brenner to line his language up with Brett Hillier's language in the House. And that is something right now that you could jump in on the advocacy effort. And the reason this is so important, and I know we all know this, and especially Director Smith, because this comes from the OFA needs assessment report. Older Ohioans are accessing homeless services now more than ever before. That number has been increasing. People on fixed incomes are uniquely susceptible to housing cost challenges. So the Housing Trust Fund can be a really good source for communities and local governments to do those home repair projects, to do all the things that we need to do to help our older adults. This is just one population. So really ask for your support on that, and look forward to the conversation of where do we go from here. The education and awareness, good step in the right direction. We definitely need all our multi-sector partners, a wide variety of partners, to step up and speak up. We want all levels of government to get involved. It's not going to be one policy that solves our problems. It's going to be many various policy ideas. It's not, there's no one silver bullet. So lots of good ideas on this panel. Would love to talk more. I'll conclude on the three things that our race equity director said yesterday. And I said, I'm going to use this again. He says, refrain, restrain, and retain. He says, refrain from preemptions, restrain predatory entities, and retain affordable status long-term. So the refrain from preemptions, I think, is geared could be towards legislators, and it could be towards advocates, being careful that we don't do things at the state level that hurt the local work that's going on, the great local work that's going on. And restrain predatory entities, I think that's self-explanatory. And then the retain affordable status long-term is, as we think big picture, how do we keep our affordable properties affordable more than just 10 years? And after the 30 years, how do we incentivized to continue another 30 years. So I'll pass the baton back over to Iona and look forward to digging a little deeper into the conversation.
Thanks, Jana. And for everybody that was on and saw the note that Councilman Brancatelli, I think, was making a t-shirt for Director Martin O'Toole, that sounds like the next t-shirt, right? Refrain, restrain, and retain. So get on it. So as I welcome all of the panelists back, I believe, I'm going to start with a couple questions. And so, Gina, actually, I just defined nuance point about HB 181. I'm curious, what is the financial impact if there is not an even split between the Housing Trust Fund and the county recorders if that does not happen for the increase?
So it doesn't change what we get right now. But as you know, everything's tied to the real estate market. And so it's very important that if we're giving our local politician more money to run their office with less people, because they're, going towards the electronic route, why would we not give our local people more money to make sure the emergency shelters are where they need to be? Because that's a big part of that. Again, the home repair, we know we have wait lists for home repair issues, and then development, which we've been talking about that. So it is just making sure we're at the same pace and at the same level as where we are with the real estate situation, because it is tied to, transactions, because that's the main way the recorder fees are getting funded, is through real estate transactions. So we just want to be at that 50-50 split, or you could say mirror whatever they're getting, so that we're in line with the current real estate market.
Thank you. Senator Reynolds, I have just a follow-up because a couple of people have mentioned the Senate Select Committee, and I know that you are touring the state, and I was wondering, do you have dates to share with everyone here so that anyone wants to come testify, that they'll know where to go and when to go?
Well, thank you for the question. We are in the process of developing what those dates are, but we are going to be in Marietta on Monday, December the 4th at 10 a.m. And I believe I'll have to see exactly where we're going to be in Marietta, but if anyone wants to reach out to my office, if you are in that area, please feel free to come, and we would love to have your testimony. If you want to do that, then you would just want to reach out to our office and make sure that we get your testimony today, because the hearing is on Monday. I will also be coming to Cleveland. I believe that date is July 11th. It was going to be today, but because of this conference, we decided, if you can't beat them, join them. So that's why I'm here today, because we want to hear a lot of testimony from those of you that are in the Cleveland and Cuyahoga area. So January 11th is slated tentatively for Cleveland, and we can certainly, if you go on our site at the Ohio Senate, there's a committee, you can click committees and sign up for updates for the Housing Committee, and that's how you can get information anytime things come out about where we're going to be. We also are going to Lima, and Lima will be December 11th. So Marietta next, then Lima, then Cleveland. Beyond that, I know that we are going to visit maybe at least 3 more places before we round it out, and then we will have a few more hearings in Columbus, probably in February. We are looking to issue our report maybe in March, and then start with legislation in April.
And 2 other follow-up questions regarding that. Thank you so much for sharing that information. So as a lot of friends and colleagues are here in Cleveland, and I'm sure will aim to testify when you are here, is there anything that maybe you really haven't heard or that you're curious about that you would like to hear when you're here in Cleveland or any of the other future hearings?
So I think we're hearing a lot of the same things, but I can appreciate that things are different in rural municipalities versus our urban cities and our suburbs. So we really want to know what's working, and we want to know what we as a legislature, what role we should be playing, because I can appreciate the non-preemption. We're not trying to come in and just say this is what's going to be done. We want to work together. We want to pretty much build a mosaic in Ohio, what housing should look like, but we know that we have to play a role. So we want to know what that role is. Now, having said that, you know, what we're seeing is that cities are operating kind of disconnected, and that's not necessarily helping the process. So what we would like to do is kind of play a role of a catalyst and a convener to bring kind of everybody to the table, and that we can work more uniformly, especially as it relates to zoning and land use and property taxes and things like that. So if we can position something where we can provide some sort of asset management or what have you as a state, where we may have grant dollars, we may set aside a pot of money, allow people to apply for that. As far as the cities, it will be more of a carrot and stick approach, is that, you know, we're willing to share resources, but we need you to be able to agree that these are some smart moves that we want you to make. And that would qualify you to be able to access those resources, as opposed to preemption. But I also feel like it's a balancing act. If there's something that the state should be doing and can do more efficiently, because a lot of times, you know, bureaucracies get in their own way, then we may need to play that role at the state and at least, you know, do a freedom within limits sort of thing. So for instance, I'll just be specific. When it comes to accessory dwelling units, I think that's pretty popular. If you already own property, you should be able to build essentially another property in your own backyard, or put something on top of your garage that can actually help you absorb some density. Well, you know, we don't want to tell a city that, you know, we're going to just allow people to do this. But what we may say is, you know, we will license this at the state. So we will authorize it. We will license and authorize accessory dwelling units, but then a homeowner will have to work with their local city to do that, you know, all of the specifications and things like that. So there's a role that I think that we can play and we can work together, but it is a balancing act.
Thank you.
Real quick, I just want to, I think the senator hit on a really important point there, and in that, you know, the state of Ohio is extremely diverse geographically, and that's one of our benefits, right? That's one of our strengths, but it does bring challenges in how, you know, the needs in the city of Cleveland is different than in Ironton, is different than Toledo, and it's something at OFA that we always have an eye towards and we always try to address, but it's definitely very challenging trying to come up with policy that will serve the entire state of Ohio, but then still also recognize those different challenges and needs in those different areas of the state. But I thought that was a really important point that the senator made. Yeah.
All right. There is kind of a comment and a question from Ronald Leary, or at least a comment. So I'll pose it really to the group. It's focused to Senator Reynolds, but just if there's an opportunity, if you see it. If you think there have been rules, several municipal courts have started sealing eviction records by local rule about 5 years ago. And these local rules have set criteria for sealing of these evictions. And just curious, like, is there an opportunity, or what do people feel is there an opportunity, since these rules have been in place, for there to be a statewide eviction and sealing process that the General Assembly could consider?
So I actually just read that message. I think it's a really good idea, but I would want to hear some testimony around if we think that that's a, you know, if that's something that we want to do, if it's doable, how we think. Obviously it's going to be impactful, but I would like to hear what some other people think about that, because that could certainly be some proposed legislation on eviction sealing. I know we're doing something similar through the governor's office on sealing. It's the governor's expedited pardon project. So pardoning at the state level, because only a governor can do that. So I'm wondering if that's a role the state legislature should play, or if that's something that we should do more at the court level with, you know, our common police courts and things like that. So I'd love to hear what others have to think about that.
All right, I know that Director Smith, you mentioned, of course, down payment assistance, but we have a particular question as it relates to, fairly similar, about security deposits for renters. And not to put you on the spot, but just to open that question up to everyone, or do people know of any funds available to help low-income people to pay upfront security costs as a barrier to rental housing?
Yeah, so we had what we titled Save the Dream Homeowner Assistance Fund. So it was mortgage assistance on the homeowner side. And now the Department of Development had rental assistance as well, kind of mirroring that on the rental side. I'm not sure if deposit was part of that. I would probably refer, I think it's Nina, to your community action agency. They may have some funds that it's probably the easiest place to go to get some answers. If there are funds out there to get folks in. We did, and Senator Renner mentioned this, I think, in her opening about, the difficulty in housing individuals coming out of incarceration. We set up, along with a couple other state agencies, what was called the Landlord Mitigation Fund to help incentivize landlords to take in difficult to house individuals, not only previously incarcerated, but also individuals with some mental health challenges, those kind of things. So we've done some things on the rental side, but with just specific to the security deposit, I would start with the community action. I don't know if other folks had different ideas on that, but.
Yep, that's what I would say too. And you're welcome to reach out to Ohio, and we can put you in we can send you in the right direction. But yes, certain areas of the state do have some programs specific to that. So yeah.
Thank you. And I want to transition to maybe it's a conflation of two issues, either Welcome Home Ohio or the single family tax credit. I guess just a little bit more clarification as I received the question regarding who can apply. So there's a little bit still of mystery out there. So I'm wondering if one of the Seans perhaps can expound on that a little more.
So I think I have a little more concrete answer than maybe Sean Carvin does. So I'll go ahead and start. So with again, we're still in the draft process for the single family tax credit. Multifamily is pretty much set, but with the single family, the draft that came out yesterday has an individual, and we mirrored what we did with our current mortgage programs. We figured it's the first year, let's start with what we know, what has worked for us in the past, but basically 80 to 120% area median income. And then we mirrored the credit scores that we currently have. Depending upon the program, it's either 640, 650. We did get some data in recently from a loan servicer that showed when you drop that credit score just 10 points, it doubles the amount of defaults, the amount of late payments, the amount of foreclosures. So we're kind of tied to that 640. We like that 640 score. We want to make sure with this that folks who get into home ownership, that we're setting them up for success. The last thing we want to do is get someone into a home or see a bunch of folks getting into homes that, 2 years from now, we're getting foreclosures on these things. So, Sean mentioned home buyer education. We require that as well with all of our mortgage products. We're going to require it in this program as well. We want to see folks be successful.
I guess maybe let me re-ask the question. What entities? So you mentioned.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, totally fine. Because that was a great, we needed that information as well. But as far as municipalities or CDCs or yes, thank you.
So the statute, so when we drafted this legislation, we wanted to see public-private partnerships. We feel that's critical in making sure that the locations of these properties are sited in the right places. If we just only allowed home builders, they've got a certain incentive to build in certain places. And so we wanted the government entities to help inform that conversation. So that public-private partnership we thought was real important with that application coming in the door. We wanted that government entity to lead that conversation. But by the statute, it can be a county, township, municipal corporation, regional planning commission, community improvement corporation, economic development corporation, county land reutilization corporation, or port authority. So that's who's defined by statute. Now, within both our rules, draft rules, and the allocation plan, those government entities can partner with other entities. So if you get you know, a nonprofit, that NeighborWorks, for example, they want somebody to come in and help them with this project. You may have a government that's very small, a township that's very small, doesn't have the expertise or the staff to do this. They can't designate that other entity to act on their behalf. Now that government entity still, we want them in the loop still, but they can, for our most recent draft, go ahead and partner with an expert, right, and doing these types of things. The other thing we included, what we didn't want to see happen was a county. I'm here in Columbus, Franklin County, you know, want to partake in this program, and they identify some sites in some township somewhere, and the township has no idea what's going on, and suddenly the county's coming in and building there. So anytime you've got a higher geographic level of government coming with an application, we want to see a letter of support from that smaller level of government as well, so that they can demonstrate then to us in the application that everyone's on board with this project. No one's imposing themselves on anyone else. And then finally, before I let Sean jump in here, is we want to see that government entity bringing something to the table. The state of Ohio stepped up with $50 million each year on the single family side. We're going to, you know, with those dollars, improve realty, improve the tax base in that area, improve the community. We'd like to see that government entity bring something to the table: land, infrastructure costs, you know, waiving tap fees and inspection fees, something like that, where they're also contributing to the project in some way that hopefully will then bring down that cost of construction I talked about earlier. Because the lower the cost of construction, the lower we can get somebody into home ownership, you know, at that price point. So we think that's very important as well.
And I guess one other, now this is my question. So can a city, for instance, apply using different multiple partners? So maybe they have one as NeighborWorks, isn't that okay?
Yeah, and you can even have, you could have the county come in with the land bank. You know, the land bank's got the land, the county's got the ability to administer it, and those different government entities can even partner up together as well. We like to see those partnerships. Yeah.
I'll jump in. I wish I had as clear of an answer as Mr. Smith did, but per the legislation, nonprofit, so land banks are the only eligible lead applicant. Then within that, they can work with developers. So they're defining those as nonprofit corporations that deal specifically in development or preservation of affordable housing, a private entity that is a partner of a nonprofit corporation, or a community improvement corporation. That is all that's defined in the bill. I think even with those just being so land bank eligible applicant and then these developers, there's still a lot of room in there for land banks to work with other agencies, as like if a land bank's gonna get the application and then work with a private developer, like they can just be a pass through for that, which I see is probably going to be a very likely scenario to get this money to like to CDCs or habitats or all of these other groups that are doing housing and can assist with this funding.
Now for our crowd or our audience, we have maybe about 5 to 10 minutes left. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I will ask our panelists. Panelists, do you have any questions for each other? I wanted to open that up. All right, if not, I have oh no, go ahead, Sean.
If there's no questions, Senator Reynolds, could you give us like a rundown of what specifically you've been hearing through the Housing Committee? Like, what are your top 5 or 10 things? I mean, you said everyone is kind of saying the same thing, so I figure there's some theme there that would be, I guess, helpful to know.
I mean, we're hearing a lot. One thing I can say is, I'll echo what Gina said, is that there's no silver bullet here. This is a very complex problem, and all of you realize that. So it's very dynamic, and we're going to have to make a number of adjustments to. But I think that making some smart moves is going to allow us to go a long way. So, you know, on zoning, there's issues with zoning. We need to be more flexible. specifically with that, with property taxes. And some of this stuff is local, it's not necessarily state. So we have to play this delicate balance of, what can we do? What should we be doing so that we don't do too much? Then, we have the issue with, the tax credits, how do everybody wants more funding. And so, how do we prioritize that? And how do we make sure that projects can be eligible? Then we also are talking about, evictions and rents are too high. So a lot of these things, if you pull one string, then you got other strings. And so this is very, very, very delicate balance. And we're hearing this all over. Also, there are departments that are big and sophisticated, like the city of Columbus and the city of Cleveland. They may not have a resource problem, but, they're big and inefficient. To get a building permit, sometimes it's, the process just takes way too long. And to get from soup to nuts to get a building, started and all the way finished, we're talking over a year. And on residential or even multifamily housing. And so sometimes we're in the way. And then in rural communities, they don't have the infrastructure. So we have infrastructure challenges, or they don't have the technical expertise when it comes to changing their zoning code. So everybody has different needs and challenges. The good news is that there are some other states that have done some really incredible things that are similarly situated, like Ohio, like Austin, Texas, and Montana, and things like that. And so we're looking to see some of the things that they've done. The things that are low-hanging fruit, we're going to probably do immediately. I know that there's a big conversation about institutional investors and how they're coming in and buying up everything. I kind of have an out-of-the-box idea that I'll reserve for later on how to leverage institutional investors with public-private partnerships and do more of a co-equity share. That if you're going to come in and buy up in our neighborhoods, then you got to do it with a local home buyer. So now we're, talking about leveraging that and not necessarily, running people out of town. How can we work together? And so I think that there's just a really big picture, and we have to figure out how do we get all of us to kind of work together and meet in the middle, because everybody's just doing their own thing. I've talked with the Ohio Department of Development with the director, and she's on board. And what I'd like to see is that the Department of Development start a dashboard so that when we do make these changes, we can actually see how the needle is moving. What progress are we making? Because right now it's a bunch of conjecture. We do know we have a crisis. We're doing a lot of things, but we don't know if what we're doing is working or it's effective. So the Department of Development did a similar study. They're about to issue their findings, and I would like them to, at this point, develop a dashboard. So just like we did with COVID-19, and every time we did something, we could see if we, what the metrics are and if it's working. Because we're a data-driven state, we really need to use data to see if what we're doing is working, and if not, and it's inefficient, then we needed to do something different. So it's going to take all of us. I think that's the underlying theme, and I'm so glad that we have so many people in this fight from various aspects. And like I said, when I started the conversation, I help some of the hardest to house. So I don't want to just let this be a conversation about, the average citizen in Ohio. There's certainly people that don't even make, those that are poor. We have those that have barriers because of disabilities, those that have been incarcerated, mental health challenges. And so, for people like that, they don't even make the charts. And so we need to make sure that housing works for everybody. And I'm just happy to be able to be a part of the solution.
And Iona, I'll jump in really, really quick just to highlight and emphasize the importance of this committee that Chair Reynolds has taken the leadership role. We have never had this before. This is something we've never had before. This opportunity is so huge. Not only do we have a committee, we have a chair who actually wants to get things done, who actually understands the issue. So I think we need to take advantage of this. And the other point I'll make is I don't think that everyone was totally on board with talking about all things housing. I think some people would have loved this committee to only talk about home ownership. And Chair Reynolds has been so gracious to include everybody, the whole population. So I appreciate that from Ohio's perspective, but I really do honestly think if we focus on some of the hardest hit communities and those that are hardest to reach, that we are going to solve problems throughout the whole spectrum. So just really, really hope that people will get involved and come testify at one of these hearings around the state.
Thank you both. I almost feel like that's a great place to stop. We only have a couple more minutes. We really don't have time for another question. But if there are any other final thoughts or comments from any of the panelists?
No, I think that summed it up. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was a good way to close. Yep.
Senator Reynolds, thank you so much. You really did round us out. And Gina, thank you so much for really underscoring the importance of the committee and the forthcoming hearing. So I really encourage everyone that's on the line to really think about and consider appearing at the hearings and sharing your viewpoint, because it does absolutely, I think everyone's viewpoint will be helpful and guide the direction moving forward. So thank you, everyone, for taking the opportunity or the time out of your Friday afternoon to sit with us and chat a little bit about issues downstate. And I'll turn it over, I think, to Greg or Frank.
Yeah, I think we'll be taking a break. Greg will probably put up some slides saying that we have 10 minutes. Is that right, Greg?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Ayana, and thank you, panel.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah.